Good morning. Do you hear me well? Friends, peers, mentorees, mentors, idols, and people whom I haven't met yet but intend to. As it happens, I am taken up these days with a project in Lanao del Sur, Islamic part of the Philippines. It's an information center for Marawi, whose principal intent is to narrate through a curatorial process the war that happened in Mindanao, in Marawi, in 2017. It was a dreadful affair that lasted 5 months. Channeled through the practice of curation as ethical navigation. And today's paper is about ethical navigation. This morning, the paper takes place for me against the background of terrible things. So it's not a happy paper, but it does end up happy. I think I can promise you that. But this is not unusual for me. The simultaneity of material culture research and combat of all sorts. This is, I sort of exist in this intersection. This time, for this occasion, I'm going to try and be closer to this computer. I thought it would be productive to clearly foreground this simultaneity, this, the dreadful things and material culture research, because I thought it might be really productive. Indeed, my experiences with violent conflict gave me to understand the necessity of what I call complex mappings. And yes, relevant to the field of our concern, traditional textiles of Isla in Southeast Asia, believe it or not. I do not believe that textile research is an ethically neutral ground. And I hope to persuade you that it is not an ethically neutral ground. Pulling back a bit, just a bit about how I use the word complex is from the complexity sciences. I'm not asking you to read this, just to give a cue about my use of the word. Now, before the mapping exercises of this paper, let me share with you a picture of what I might be possibly getting at. This group of women were not weavers when the war began in Marawi. It was May 23, 2017. They were simply not weavers. They learned to weave during the war, and that's their product. As you can see, all of you are textile, well, most of you are textile experts, and you will see the quality is quite degraded. Nonetheless, for people who started weaving during a war, it's certainly worth noting. Very few Maranao women actually are weavers today. In fact, unlike some perhaps 50 years ago, when nearly all were weavers. These women banded together with the help of an embedded war correspondent, worked with a weaving mentor, and produced these fabrics, first out of synthetic yarn and then cotton. As you can see, they are by no means virtuosos. Their fabrics are not the kinds we are used to studying. These are paltry cloths and are mere shadows of the extraordinary Maranao textile achievements of the past. If you focus on the purple tubular garment held by the woman at the center and compare it with this, you will see the decline of the tradition. We may find very little to say about the textiles these women wove. However, I find it quite remarkable that during the carpet bombing, by the way, Marawi City looks like Gaza, for those who are unfamiliar with, and it still remains the same. You might find very little to say about this except for journalistic or perhaps ethnographic interest. But the remarkable thing is what they told me, that the focus demanded by weaving allowed them to shut off the bombardment sounds. And they survived the war with a little bit of money that they got from weaving, but also with the psychological or what have you, mental capacity of taking away that sound, which was constant for about 5 months. So more than anything else, the weaving gave them mental space to survive incredible destruction. I took the liberty of bringing you to this intersection of textiles and war to introduce some mapping possibilities. Temporal spatial maps of declining traditions are foremost on my mind, and declining traditions are going to be the focus of this paper. I think you're more or less getting where I'm going. And it is that timelines that reveal the decline or degradation of technical virtuosity and aesthetic integrity are begging to be mapped. That is to say, laid out across specific physical and linguistic cultural spaces. The mapping can be reckoned visually. For the entire Lanao del Sur to Maguindanao, where live the Maranao and Iranun-speaking communities, the extinction, and I use the word extinction, of weft ikat in silk some 15 years ago, for example, potentially a few women can execute these materials. Let me show you some of these materials. Well, right now can still be woven, but there is no silk. I just want to say weft ikat, which we will get into later, is only done by a very few women and one man in Maguindanao. So to the extinction of compound ikat, only one of two compound ikat traditions in the Philippines, one's in Antique, which is in central Philippines, are to be cited, so to speak. And yes, speaking parenthetically, the metaphor, which I use deliberately, the metaphor of species decline, of ecosystems collapse, and extinction may be richly mapped. So I am deliberate in using extreme words because it does allow me to sort of borrow the lexicon of climate change and ecosystems collapse in general, because what I'm talking about is ecosystems collapse, and I am not exaggerating. So here we go. Well, this is their situation right now in Marawi. Right, this can no longer be done. Weft ikat silk, nor compound ikat silk. But let's do tapestry for a while. This is the Pisiabit of the Tausug people. This is a pretty incredible 100-year-old piece. Shabit, Sambit was uttered yesterday, is the way the technical process of tapestry is rendered in Philippine vocabularies, not just the Tausug one. But all I'm saying to begin this 4 or 5 slides is that tapestry, the technique, is only executed in the entire island Southeast Asia amongst the Tausug, the Maranao, the Iranun, the Yakan, a little bit in Lombok, and I was speaking to you yesterday, Tetun in Timor. So it's an extremely rare tradition, and this is what more or less it looked like in the past. I wish we had the time for me to go into tapestry for such a rare thing. But this is a headcloth that was collected by the Powerhouse in Sydney, and it is dated 1970. Now, compare. You can reckon the decline, and this was collected in 2012 by the Horniman. And you can see the decline further. And then you see this was done yesterday. I mean, this is 2024, and it's a piece. These are pieces of kitsch. It's made of synthetic fibers. The decline is so dramatic. And so, let's look at it. It's alarming, But this is not a Tausug story alone. I'm just using tapestry as an example. But it is happening all over island Southeast Asia to various degrees, and that's what we're going to talk about, to various degrees. I find this set of four photographs to be rather a map, and map cartography is my metaphor for today. It is self-evident of technical and aesthetic decline. Loss of skill seems to me precipitous, as has been the case with many other cultural expressions in the world. And because it is unmapped, the decline is unmapped. Few, except for most of the people in this room, few recognize or are indifferent to signs of what would be the equivalent of ecosystems collapse. You might reasonably say that I am overstating my point. I will beg to disagree. But yes, making a case for, firstly, recognizing material culture decline that, secondly, is only visible in part of the entirety that is eroding and collapsing. This begs for some very urgent work. Let's begin with basic museological taxonomizing, materials and techniques, standard for museologists and anthropologists. The following can only be in broad strokes because a comprehensive mapping of island Southeast Asian techniques and materials will take us until tomorrow. So, and in fact, my next maybe 20, 30 sets slides will be tedious to those of you who are not in textile studies, but please bear with the technicality of it. It's not as technical as most textile scholars are, but it is certainly going to be a bit tedious for those who are not. So I'm trying to go for a middle ground here. I am only focusing on reverse or resist dyeing techniques, which means I am not paying attention or I'm not mapping for you today worlds of techniques, supplementary weft weaving, the entire world of tapestries, even if it's just a few people, a few communities, twilling, there's a lot. There's a world of embellishments, embroidery, applique, etc., etc. I'm focusing only on reverse dyeing because I think it helps me make my point. So here are our resist dyeing processes in island Southeast Asia. There's so reverse means, or reserve, for those of you who are not textile scholars necessarily, requires the reserving of parts of a cloth. In the first three, batik, plangi, and tritik, you reserve with wax parts of a whole cloth, a cloth that's already been produced, woven. With ikat, the cloth has not been woven. You are reserve dyeing threads before you weave. So this is the difference. So there's four that we are going to talk about: weft ikat, warp ikat, compound ikat, and double ikat. All right. But I am actually complicating it a little bit more, the way anthropologists would do. So there is batik in cotton. There is batik in silk, of course, but only in Java. As a matter of fact, it's fairly widespread, but it is a Javanese tradition. But like I said yesterday, I mentioned that the word batik does exist in the Philippines, even if batik does not exist in the Philippines, as a word. Batik, tik-tik, titik, batik is tattooings, making spots, writing. So it's more or less the same idea, right, as batik, although batik is a technique-specific Javanese art. Plangi, which was discussed yesterday, thank you very much. I don't need to get into it. Cotton, also in silk. Among the Bagobo, the Javanese, Balinese, Palembang Malay, this is certainly not complete. Tritik, again discussed yesterday. Cotton, only among the Central Javanese, Bagobo, Blaan, Palembang Malay. And in silk, Palembang Malay, Balinese. Again, I'm doing a very rough sketch because I really don't need to be comprehensive. Those of you who are textile scholars who want a full listing of any of my graphs, schemas, matrices, I will send you by email. And you can perhaps correct me, because I could be wrong in many occasions. But I'm quite intrigued by the ikat. Warp ikat in abaca is different from warp ikat in cotton, warp ikat in silk. Different geographies, different maps. Different cultural holes. Weft ikat in cotton, silk is different, compound ikat in cotton, compound ikat in silk, and double ikat in silk, which exists only in Bali. It also exists in Gujarat, and it exists in Central Asia. There is one Japanese double ikat in the Horyuji temple, and the keepers of the Horyuji temple treasures are not sure it's Japanese. They think it's Central Asian as well. So this is among the, I mean, if you want to use the word rare, this is rare. Double ikat. All right. So this is that rare thing. This is the ginseng. I wanted to start with this because there's only one. The ginseng, which was shown yesterday as well, is double ikat from Bali. This is an example from the Australian Museum. Now, I'm going to show you tritic because, again, we're going to skip past the tritic and the pelangi. This is Bagobo tritic. University of Pennsylvania, UPenn Museum. And this is Timor. Kisar, which is way in Nusa Tenggara Timor of Indonesia. Now, I am showing this and the next one. Oh, sorry, it's not there for some reason. Here it is. This is a magnificent piece, which is in the American Museum of Natural History. It is, to me and to many textile scholars, the sublime level of achievement of Bagobo ikat. And it's hardly lent or loaned. But if you would take a look at this and this is abaca warp ikat, and this is cotton warp ikat. Now, the reason I'm putting them together is not to speculate. I put them together to assure you that I will not be speculating about anything by comparing motifs, patterns, even color, because this is not the point of my paper and my argument this morning. But I do want to tell you that, as was uttered yesterday, there are many intriguing lines of inquiry. But the reason I'm not going to get into those lines of inquiry, the comparative for the moment, for this morning, is because these are all Austronesian societies, and similarities and differences can be mapped within the Austronesian family of languages in island Southeast Asia. I mean, we shouldn't be surprised at seeing similarities and differences of very intriguing levels. All right, so here's warp ikat, and it exists among the Maranao, Tiboli, Laan, Bagobo, Tagakaulo. I was having a conversation with our friend formerly from ADB. It exists in the Yayama archipelago because the farthest north abaca grows is in the area of Taketomi, which are the islands of Japan, the southernmost islands of Japan, very close to Taiwan, closer to Taiwan than to Tokyo. And they have warp ikat abaca. The northernmost layer of the world where abaca grows. North of that, abaca doesn't grow. Now, also, Sangir Talaud is the southernmost area where abaca grows naturally. So there is ikat in Sangir and Talaud. Otherwise, as you can see, abaca is a Philippine material. It is not woven in Indonesia. But there is obviously warp ikat in Indonesia. And Well, I'll show you first warp ikat abaca. This is a beautiful thing, acquired in 1914. The Metcalf sisters are famous for trading and putting into the major American museums enormous amount of warp ikat textiles in abaca. By the way, the American Museum of Natural History has 300 plus bagobo textiles from 1910. So if anyone wants to do a PhD on bagobo textiles, you'll have to stay a year in New York. And nowhere else. No. You'll have to go to Leiden. You'll have to go to the other European museums. This is a beauty. This is Subanen. And it comes from an anonymous collection. This is warp ikat abaca. So like I said, because abaca is pretty much between the Yayama archipelago of Japan and Sangir Talaud, and the rest is the Philippines, then you can pretty much say with confidence, without speculating, that abaca is Philippine. But it does grow in parts of Africa as well, in the same band. All right, let's go to warp ikat cotton. Now, I'm not asking you to meditate on this, but just to give you the spread of the map. And like I said, for those of you who are not textile specialists, well, just enjoy this this idea of a very large spread. So if abaca is in the Philippines, then you see cotton, which has been around island Southeast Asia for at least 1,000 years. So you have the Mayaw-Yaw Ifugao and the Tuwali Ifugao. Not all of the Ifugaos, by the way. There are 3 Ifugao languages, so it's only the Mayaw-Yaw and the Tuwali ones that weave warp ikat cotton. Maranao, of course, you will find Maranao everywhere, and that's why I was really, I couldn't resist the urge to tell you about the war, because Maranao is here everywhere in all of the lists. So the extent of the damage in Marawi is really of staggering proportions. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So Iban, you know that, Sarawak, I have some pictures, so, but let me just show you. So you have the Philippines from Ifugao, and then Borneo, the Sarawak side, and also the Kalimantan side. They're all Iban, different kinds of Iban. And then there's, all the way on the other side in Timor-Leste, you have the Tetun people with cotton ikat, warp. Places like, well, of course, it's both Timor-Leste and Timor-Barat. And of course, Timor-Barat is Indonesia, and Timor-Leste is its own country. But of course, this is a cautionary word for all of us, that nationalistic discourses do weigh on studies like this, of material culture, because, none of these traditions were there when the nations, well, none of the nations were there when these traditions were formed. So national boundaries should not have an overly strong persuasive impact on studies of this nature, because the Tetum people in Timor, they live both in Timor-Leste and Timor-Barat, in 2 different countries now. All right. All of this entity, there's a lot of entity is sa Tenggara Timor. It's like a whole bunch of islands after Bali, after Lombok. And then, of course, then we go to Sulawesi. The Toraja people have magnificent cotton warp ikats. Central Sumatra, Utara, the Batak people, Toba, Simalungon, Karo, yep, they're all there. And then there's Iban in Kalimantan, which belongs to Indonesia, but, the Iban are all over the place in the island of Borneo. All right, then you have in Flores, of course, Sika, Ngada, Leo, Palue. These are major cotton ikat producing places, all of whom, Sumba, hello, we have somebody from Sumba here, and you have Sumba textiles outside. All right, yeah, Sumba's there, and even Kisar, Maluku, and Tanimbar. Roti has magnificent textiles for such a little island. Savu is a little island. All right, so let's take a look at them. This is warp ikat cotton ranau. This is the Puakumbu, magnificent. Iban, Sarawak. This one, they're all over the world in various collections. This one is from Yale. It's hard to choose one. The ulus, and there's all sorts of ulus, as was told to us yesterday. This is Toba Batak. This is in Sumatra Utara. You see, this is a little place called Lembata in Nusa Tenggara Timor. It's distinct. It's beautiful. You're beginning to see that the cotton and abaca ikat, warp ikat, do have relationships, which I will not speculate on right now. This is Toraja. And this does not represent Toraja by any means. The range of cotton ikats, warp ikats from the Toraja area of Sulawesi is unbelievable. And a small place, it's Iban also from Kalimantan. So it's kind of different from the Sarawak Iban. This is from a small island called Savu. Now, you're going to begin to see, because of yesterday's preliminary lectures, that the impact of Patola, the Gujarati double ikat, is quite clear. This is a very, very special textile. It's from Bajawa in Flores. And my understanding is no more than about 12 existed ever. But, you know, the dealer might be telling a lie. But it's called the Lavo Butu. And it's one of the most expensive of the Southeast Asian textiles. The beads are Anahita beads, which are Neolithic beads. Now, it doesn't mean that the cloth is Neolithic, but this is of extreme rarity. Western Flores, the Bajawa area. And this wonderful piece from Kisar, again, Nusa Tenggara Timor. And this is Flores, Leo District. I tried to do a close detail, but it pixelated. Now, this is cotton, date undetermined, Isinay. So this is the area below Ifugao, heavily Christianized for the last 400 years, but this remains almost extinct, but had been revived in the last decade. And this is in the British Museum. It's a beautiful piece, and we wouldn't know that it existed, this form. I mean, there are a few things, there are a few in the American museums, but this one is a beauty. It's brown, it's not blue, and it was acquired in 1914. It's very special. All right, so I just wanted to give you the range of the warp ikat cotton. So as you can see, it forms a map. You can see it's quite visual. Now let's take a look at, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, all right? I really do not want to be overly technical. But here's Weft Ikat silk. Maranao, Iranun, Maguindanao, Balinese, Baliaga, which means the earlier Bali, Palembang Malay, Minangkabao, Achinese, and so on and so forth. This is a listing that I promise people who are interested, a complete part of this list. But here are examples. This is a tubular garment. We call it malong in the Philippines. Maguindanao, Weft Ikat silk. All right, this is not dead as a tradition. It's been revived in the last 10 years, but people have had a hard time acquiring silk. So there are attempts now at making it, at weaving again in silk. Weft Ikat. Weft Ikat is actually technically harder than warp ikat because you are tie-dyeing the threads that you're introducing. So the alignment of threads as you go this way and that way is mind-boggling. This is Weft Ikat, Maguindanao. Right, let's just jump. Weft Ikat cotton, this is where it exists. Lanao also, again, Maranao, as you can see, there's a lot from Marawi. Lombok, sorry about Maranao twice. Iban again, Tetum, both Leste and Barat, La Malera, the Sadan Toraja, and the Toba Batak. Again, I'll give you a list if you are interested. Now, if you'll give me a moment to catch my breath. Now, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that there is a point to the tedious mapping. And I'm going to sort of give you a sketch of why I think it is important, not just for the world of material culture studies, but I'm shifting now to the domain that I'm most concerned with. So you can see that batik comes from a society that had central authority, Java. There'd been a kraton for a long time. Centralizing polities in the areas where Plangi and Tritik. These are also the areas which had profound impact of the trade in South Asian textiles and with the Middle East. Then we look at where the Ikats are. Small-scale shifting agricultural societies. All right, so that's where you will classify Tiboli, Bagobo, Subanan, the Timor, the Iban are small-scale societies, previously not settled only in the last 50 years, or settled within the last 100 years. All right, in the case of the Tiboli, definitely 50 years ago was the time that they had a town, 2 towns at the same time. Now, Warp Ikat cotton, larger scale agriculturists. Those of you who are real textile scholars will challenge some of this might look like very reductive descriptions. And obviously I hope to be corrected. But I would also like to say that the point I'm making is that there are differences in the kinds of social organizations depending on the technique and the material. All right. So when you see Warp Ikat cotton, they are larger scale, Toraja, for instance, with substantial external trade. Because when you look at the Nusa Tenggara Timor textiles, Roti, Flores, I showed you some of them. You see Sulawesi, you see southern Philippines. Well, not southern Philippines so much, but the ones in Nusa Tenggara, definitely Java and Sumatra. But the spread of South Asian, and Patola in particular, iconography, let's put it that way, is profound. I don't use the word influence for a number of reasons, but I would also like to emphasize the fact that the people in this part of the world, island Southeast Asia, did not just receive things. As was pointed out yesterday, there's a huge amount of agency about what island Southeast Asians bought or procured from South Asia. It's quite distinct. And each island made a distinct variation of what they received. When you're talking about silk, you're shifting into larger scale polities. And then Weft Ikat and cotton, if you're looking at Weft Ikat, you're looking at urbanizing societies. Except in the Maranao case, the Weft Ikat cotton, urbanizing societies through half a millennium. Also for Weft Ikat silk. And compound ikat, there is no shared profile. This stops me short because I've only found compound ikat in Antique, which is in central Philippines in a place that's been Christianized for 400 years. Compound ikat. And Maranao again. So I can't give you a profile. Compound ikat silk, larger scale agriculture. It's like the same as the silks. Once you get into the silks and the weft ikat, then you're looking at bigger societies. And of course, when you get to double ikat, you know what Bali is. It's a kingdom. All right, so you get the picture here of mapping the techniques, the materials. And I'd like to pause here to say that you can do all sorts of cartographies, and I would be most enthusiastically supporting you. You could do maps of color, chromaticism, which would be different, considering the registers and the values that are given to particular registers of color. I would like to point out Dr. Cherry Kison's work on the linumbos, which is a particular saturation of the color red among the Bagobo, which is a very, well, it's a complex, is all I can say, about one color value, one level of saturation. I encourage you to read Dr. Soteropoulos' work on the linumbos. It's a particular saturation of color. So you can map color. You can map language, which I am trying not to do here. But of course, you can map language, the spread of different words, like the word yesterday that we used for Maguindanao textiles. It was, it's a variation of the word abel, which is to weave all over the Philippine archipelago. Abel, sorry. Inaul is the same word. Mavel in Tiboli. Hablon in Iloilo, it's the same word. But then you go to Basilan and the word is tenun, which is scattered all over. And then kain in Indonesia is cloth, but kain all over is to eat. And the to eat part has to do with the introduction of the warp threads into the warp, which is usually called pakan, to feed. So kain and feed does have some amount of, well, it's spread out. You can obviously make a map of that with very richly productive results. So on and on, on and on. This is by no means the only kind of mapping that you can do. But let me go on. Let me complicate it a little bit more. I'm not stopping. Right, here we go. I've tried to plot how they are. Because you saw a description of what these societies were for, perhaps half a millennium. And then we're talking about today. So you see that batik is robust. I don't think anyone is going to challenge me on that. It's really strong. So is plangi and tritik, generally healthy. A little bit of a decline if you're a connoisseur, but it's there. Many practitioners. Once you get to warp ikat abaka, nearly extinct, except in the Tiboli case. I think Bagobo ikat is extinct. Warp ikat cotton clear degeneration through the 20th century in both Indonesia and the Philippines. So I plotted which ones are extinct. Warp ikat silk all over Mindanao. All the Muslim peoples of the Philippines who used to weave exclusively in silk had not had silk in the last maybe 50, 60 years. And so the immediate decline of change of material is very visual, also palpable. Weft ikat cotton degenerated in the Philippines, strong, but with clear degeneration throughout 20th century Indonesia. Weft ikat silk, except in the Maranao case, extinct in the Philippines, unless someone provides silk to Muslim communities in the Philippines, and we'll give it a try. Compound ikat, extinct, except in Antique. All right, extinct in the Philippines, and of course, robust in Bali. Double ikat. Sorry? Why is that? This is for everyone of you to be intrigued by. I'm not saying, and I want to stop myself, because you might think that I'm saying that, because you have a kingdom, that you have a better chance of preserving your heritage. Not necessarily. Or maybe if you have a monotheism like Islam, maybe you have a better chance of resisting forces of degradation. As you can see in the Maranao case, it's totally destroyed despite Islam. So studying these maps is not an easy thing. You don't get the luxury of quick answers to hypothetical questions. But here is the ginseng being made today in Bali. So if you take a look at it, it's actually a little bit degenerated, but it is woven. This is extinct, just to give you a sense of what's extinct. Weft, ikat, silk, Maguindanao. No one can make them. The Andon Malong cannot be made. I've been looking. Now, let's take a look at Timor textiles. This is not very old. You see the ikat part is there in the middle, upper part. And this is when the disastrous birth of Timor happened. And as you can see from this, which is not so old, to that, which is what the child is holding in front of the soldier, is a severe technical decay. Now, I'm only reading this as an example of what you will find everywhere in island Southeast Asia. Civil society trying to help the traditions with the same words, heritage, preservation, etc., etc. So I'll read it because it will be familiar to you. Working with these communities in Timor-Leste's far eastern district of Lautem, the cooperative seeks to lift the burden of poverty, you hear this over and over, by marketing naturally dyed, traditionally hand-woven textiles. Since 2007, same period, more or less, working in Timor-Leste to support women's empowerment through ethical trade. You hear the same words, ethical trade, fair trade, on and on. This is a familiar vocabulary of civil society. This is also familiar, being born out of resistance movements, out of wars, and founded by 3 women, the foundational women, each a widow of a resistance fighter. You hear this all the time, various degrees of difference. And the organic way these things grow, and there are existing skills and a form of weaving, and the word unique is always uttered or inscribed. But as you can see, it's hard to use the word unique. It's traditionally taught to girls, and post-conflict Timor. All right. Island Southeast Asia is full of texts like this and organizations like this, and I have no business being contemptuous of these efforts. But I also want to point out that the lexicon, the vocabulary, is all too similar. And really the only thing I'd like to point out is while there is reference to trouble, to turmoil, it doesn't get there. It doesn't seem to make it part of planning, perhaps, or policy. So here's, this is my final complication, I promise. So it's the same map, but it is more complicated now. All right, so let's go through it. Java, as you can see, this is Java, Batik, Plangi, Tritik, and Palembang, that area south, because the north of Sumatra are Batak people, Achanese, so it's quite different. But Java and that area is the metonym for the nation formation in Indonesia. This is pretty much where the center where everything diffuses in terms of nation building. And you know what happened there. You know that there's like 1 million people and the number is not exaggerated, who were executed when Suharto came into power in 1969. It is still an unresolved wound in the Indonesian national consciousness. And the sorrow for the unspoken million for being suspected of being part of the PKP, the Communist Party of Indonesia, which formed during the Sukarno period, and prior to '69, and which formed, well, as some of you may remember, Bung Karno was instrumental in leading the Bandung Conference of Non-Aligned Nations, for which, after that, with the rise of the dictator Suharto, there were dreadful things that happened in Indonesia, which to this day are really not discussed properly. And I see the woman from Sumba nodding her head. Thank you. All right. So it is, in effect, the nation. But once you get to Warp Ikat Abaka, you are looking at violence attendant to massive logging, mining, missions, government interference, assimilation projects, and all of that. That's where you find the granularity of the impact of deforestation and large-scale mining. This is exactly where it's happening. This is where those textiles that we're talking about and studying, this is exactly where the degradation happened, and this is where people are mightily trying to keep whatever they can keep still in their memories, or if not in their memories, in celebrating something that's like a smidgen of what it was in the past. And please do not think that I am a nostalgic person who only values the exquisite antiques. By no means. But I think we need a radical connoisseurship that understands what decline means. It is not textile decline, it is societal decline. So you can see that where there is warp ikat cotton, this includes Timor, this includes Sulawesi, this includes Maluku, Sarawak, development aggression. I'm sorry to use a bit of jargony thing. Areas regarded as the periphery of nation. So this is where you have, for instance, during the Marcos period, the attempt to create a Chico River Dam in the Cordilleras. And this is where the textiles collapsed during that period. And this is the point that people in the Cordilleras want to get back to in terms of textile skills. Silk. Islam as a source of social cohesion is noted, but it did produce a 50-year war of secession in southern Philippines. So while you can see the cohesive power of Islam, you also see that in the Philippines we had a 50-year war. And then you have weft ikat cotton, again, Islam. It goes on. And then when I'm sorry that it's not that well aligned, compound ikat silk, I mentioned Antique, and that became a difficult area because of the communist rebellion, which was all over the Visayas, as well as eastern Mindanao. So the Antique, where compound ikat exists, was the Antique of the NPA, of the New People's Army, which is why I think it kind of ground to a halt. But it's alive. It's still being done. Double ikat, of course. You have a very strong look at Hinduism as a force for cohesion. So I think the only thing I'm saying at bottom with this is my last map, I promise. Or there may be one or two more. But I'm proposing something rather simple, which is that please do not make textiles like a generic range. Every technique is different. It's a different history. different set of problems, different economic disasters, different economic successes. Everything has to be written with some amount of granularity. Okay. Oh, yeah, I do have one. Let's see. No? Okay. I'm almost on my home run, but I do need to give you a case. Oh, I'm sorry. The reason I have this is because I highlighted in red two cases that I am going to go into at some detail, but I'm not going to do the second one because I'm overlong. So I'll just do the Tiboli case. Cultural and natural ecosystems collapse. I chose a case, Benji's here with me, who is here from Lake Cebu. I chose the Tiboli case because it is not a case of extinction. It is a case of collapse, but there are 30 existing weaving centers in Lake Cebu right now. So why am I citing it? Because I'd like to cite to you an example that doesn't give us easy answers. I don't think we're allowed easy answers. But just to give you a sense of how nuanced the analysis must be. All right, so as quickly as I can. This is the tinalak, which turns out to be a verb, to mean to center, to guide, to lead, to find a way forward. Similar ideas, Benji will explain it to you if you're interested. It's certainly not a noun, which flies in the face of a lot of museological work, because a lot of the textile traditions in island Southeast Asia are not named necessarily. If you really look at the words, they are not nouns, but they are verbs. This is the oldest Tiboli tinalak that I have found. It was acquired in 1935 by the De Young, of all places, in San Francisco. It's pretty spectacular. It's Yekumo, Benji. Right, now I'd like to introduce you to Madja, who is with me here in this picture. Give me a chance to breathe. Madja is the first of 16 wives of a warlord. Would you please excuse me? My computer died. Doesn't want to get me in. All right. Okay. 14 wives is a lot, even if they are polygamous. But 4 is kind of like normal. 16 is actually abnormal anywhere, I think, except if you're Kublai Khan or somebody like that. But the number of wives of this warlord does give us an indication of something's awry. And it became awry with a definite date, the 1970s, martial law, and enormous logging and enormous mining. And the discovery of the Tasaday by if many of you are too young to remember this, it was a major thing to have a supposed Stone Age group discovered in the forests near the Tiboli area. And because they were called Stone Age, and they were supposedly living in caves, it landed on the cover of National Geographic and was legitimized thus. And I'm not saying that it was a hoax. Again, this is a very complicated matter, but I'm only mentioning it because the Lake Cebu area was the staging ground for many of the work by the national government, which began a combination of assimilative projects as well as othering projects. We cannot get into that, but Madja founded a town with her husband, Maituan. She founded the town of Tiboli 50 years ago. They just celebrated their 50th anniversary. Now, why is this important? Because that's the only time they got settled. This is also the only time that tinalak became a commodity. Prior to this, Tinalak was part of the great, I'm sorry to use the word great, but the Austronesian systems of reciprocation and exchange. But the slipping into something for sale actually did happen with women, these women. They were the ones who did it. They exchanged it for cash. Now, I'm going to kind of wander off for a little bit. After this Tiboli case, I realized that the Yakan in Zamboanga City were refugees from the bombing of Basilan, also in the 1970s, from the burning of Holo in 1974. That moved them there. They were also the first to exchange textiles for cash. Also. And then you scan about the Philippines and Indonesia, and you find that there's some dreadful circumstance that made the textile slip into the cash economy. All right. So what we're seeing now is the trading of textiles, very robust trading of degenerated textiles. I'm sorry to use the word. But also the celebration of textiles that are nothing like what they came out of. But also the idea that it still carries with it some of the mythical powers and so on and so forth. That is another seminar. I can't get into that here, but I'm just clues. This is Manda Elizalde and the so-called Tasaday. Very interesting man who's kind of a Rudyard Kipling character, the man who would be king. And he comported himself that way amongst the Tiboli. Very sexualized, and sex is part of our story, like any good story. All right, I'm going to summarize the key points of the Tiboli 50 years. Santa Cruz Mission began to sell tinalak. Santa Cruz Mission was established by a priest. And so there were two males in that town. I don't know where I put the part where the first real insertions of foreigners into this area were Protestant missionaries before and after the Second World War. They were missionaries that were mostly associated with the Summer Institute of Linguistics. They were translating the Bible into Tiboli and the other languages in this tropical rainforest. And from there, then the contacts were made. So there was Santa Cruz Mission and there was Tiboli Town. Santa Cruz Mission was established by the priest, and Tiboli Town was established by the government, Manda Elizalde, who found the Stone Age tribe. I'm sorry for being not more complex than this, but I want to go to home run already. It proposes a counterpoint to the Marcos government's untransparent moves into the territory through Manda Elizalde. The women who were in the middle of this discursive competition were the first to take on the transition into the cash economy. It happened during a period of intense logging and mining. The commodification also happened during a period of massacres all over Mindanao, mainly anti-Muslim cultish Christian paramilitary troops who engaged in wholesale slaughter of Muslims, including cannibalism, Christians eating Muslim bodies. And this was the context in which the tinalak and other ikats and traditional textiles were brought into the market. So the stress of the period was what spewed out the textiles that we now celebrate. And we're celebrating them without knowledge of the beginnings of it all. The women were the first to experience cash inflow. The women also experienced a change in sexual experiences. Now, the reason I can say this with confidence is because with the Tiboli old women, I showed you the picture, I'm an old woman, and old women like to have fun about sex with me. They're always giggling about their sexual experiences, and I obviously am somebody who they think that they can laugh with. And I suppose they won't do that with a younger woman, and certainly not a feminist, I think. I am myself a feminist, they didn't know that. But I think it was paramount that I was an old girl like them. Now, this is very interesting because both men had sexual relations with the Tiboli women. the priest, and Benji will bear me out, the priest had 8 Tiboli children with 8 different, is it 8 or 10? 10? 8 Tiboli children with 8 different Tiboli women. All right. And Manda used to bring Tiboli and other, basically children from indigenous communities in the Philippines to his posh house in Manila and to Malacanang to meet President Marcos. So there was a lot of uninscribed, let's put it that way, sexuality that was changing. And my understanding from the women who were talking to me about, who were giggling rather than talking, was that they did enjoy it. But also, in the course of time, they did learn not to talk about it because it doesn't seem to be something that they should talk about. Very hard to understand from a feminist perspective. But this is quite important because they are alive and they have a lot of stories to tell. The Austronesian reciprocation and exchange system transformed quickly into cash and benefits transactions. Today, the dependence on ikat dyeing has made Tiboli women income generators, not the men. The men do nothing in Lake Cebu, except Benji. He's a public school teacher. They generally no longer farm because they sold other lands around the lake to lowlanders. So aside from not having farms to till around the lake, Benji's an exception because he hasn't sold his land. He gave it to the House of Storytelling. There are no longer communal spaces for epic chanting, traditional dance, and I'm saying this sentence with a cautionary word that this is not out of nostalgia for those things. It's just that a people without spaces for them to perform to themselves seems a crying shame. There is no, well, everything is tinalak and everything is cash. And there is a great difficulty being experienced feeding themselves because everything has shifted into selling textiles. So this is a success story, all right? This is not a case of extinction, but it is actually complicated. Designers from urban settings have been running roughshod over deeply held knowledges, which they keep secret. Tinalak, the noun, the commodity, the converser's price, the museological artifact represents massive amputation of nuanced knowledge systems. And I say this last sentence without exaggeration. This I am including for the artists who are in the room because we did try to co-create a work of art that will convey to a contemporary art situation the experiences of the women, and we went into the ikat process itself, which tie-dyes, which reserves certain parts of the thread. So this looks like a warping frame. And so what we did was ribbon print their narratives, which they allowed to be recorded, but the parts that they did not want to tell the world about, the parts that they giggle about, and other things, are tied. So this is a way of going back into the ikat dyeing and telling their story, both in Tiboli and in English, and reserving the parts. It's a reserve dyeing, reserving the parts that they are reserving for themselves. And this is what it looked like, a whole bunch of warping frames. This is the kind of work that's being done now in academia. You will recognize this kind of work. You will recognize that it will be fruitful. But my last few slides, or my last slide, why ecosystems collapse. Why do I use the words? Despite the expanding work of the Tiboli community's ikat dyers, like I said, 30 weaving centers, because the forests for wild abaca are effectively extinct. And the abaca that they need is a forest understory plant, not plantation abaca. Because the transition to the cash economy did not replace the Austronesian system of reciprocity and exchange with business models of substantial sophistication, it still is essentially patronage. And patronage will dead end. Because the use of words like industry for ikat among the world's rarest, technically exquisite art forms, daily degrades the system of meaning being transferred into the future. Because the operational discursive frame is authenticity versus innovation, that's how these things are discussed. This frame of discussion is poor. It doesn't quite gather the complexities of the situation. Because, finally, commodification of something extraordinary should at least allow the Tiboli, especially the women, a full runway to wealth. It mustn't just give them pittance or a few centavos per cross-stitch. There doesn't seem to be a real connection between large-scale economic systems, planning and design, and this field, which is left to Oxfam type of operations. This breaks my heart. This is tapestry, quite fine, but it is in an architectural magazine, and it does say industrial. The juxtaposition of the word industrial with tapestry weaving, one of the rarest things on earth, and certainly rare in island Southeast Asia, to juxtapose it with the word industrial is a shame. Now, before I say thank you, I do need to wrap up in a better way, if you allow me a few minutes. My general proposition to you all, therefore, textile studies, material culture studies in general, arrives today, in the second decade of the 21st century, at an academic, ethical, activist, and artistic impasse. But it is there. This is not an academic discipline. This is an ethical field, which requires deft navigation and informed intelligence. I am not saying that intellectual rigor and what we might call a radical connoisseurship should be instrumentalized for political ends, no matter how good. I am saying that the same rigor in thought will bring anyone to compassion and action. No longer for exclusively antiquarian reasons, no longer exclusively for our scholarship that allows us to help our informants and their friends and families in the source communities, but do not give us time for involvement in vast collapses. At this juncture, the work cannot be to revive, to preserve, to recuperate. It's too late for that. There's no reviving, there's no recuperation. A new design for the future will not have to rest on nostalgia or for the simple need for antiques or antique level sophistication, much as I am totally in that project. But it can't be for nostalgic reasons, nor for that kind of an antique dealership trajectory. At this juncture, our work, I believe, is to foreground social justice. Thank you. Thank you very much. May I sit down?
Hello. Does anyone have any questions? No?
No questions. Yes.
Oh, sorry. Yes, go ahead.
I have one question and one input. The question is a very specific one. You mentioned Sangihe trout, the Sangihe trout, talking about avocado. In Indonesia, just as the place which have also avocado textiles,
Sangir and Talawud.
Yes, Sangihe.
Sangihe, yes.
Right. And the island is pretty close to Mindanao. But what they have is, their culture is not really ikat culture. They have a strong floating.
I agree.
The avocado textile. I'm curious why they're not really, they don't do the ikat, but floating.
I have seen ikat in the past,
Okay, in the past they have.
but I am an old woman, so I'm assuming.
And you probably know there's a reviving movement.
Yes, there is.
Protein, out,
That's right.
textile. And another thing, just the input about double cuts.
Mm-hmm.
Not just all users, but also sewing. They have a little more.
Yes,
Plus,
yes, thank you. Shoshoin, yes.
right, and Okinawa, they have the tradition of the double cuts. Just to add to you.
That's right. There is double ikat. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Yes.
Please.
Any other questions? Yes, go ahead.
I love the powerful message about social justice. But how do we create, it's always like the tourism, buying, these textiles have a very, very kind of limited representation in the minds of the public. We're just like consumers. And we don't understand this big story that you just told us. We normal people, not the experts in the room. And I feel like maybe you have a suggestion on what's the pathway to turning, like the way the French wineries turn champagne into something that's preserved, protected, branded, and impossible to be reproduced anywhere else under that particular name. Maybe that's what is the pathway to giving these women and craftspeople a way of preserving and profiting from their labors?
Like I said, any pat answer should be suspect. So trying not to be pat. One way is what I tried to outline, rigorous scholarship, just to see what really is going on. Because, when you're looking at a textile from Bali, you're looking at something different from an ikat from the Blaan people or from Ifugao. But just to be able to make those distinctions is really an important part of this whole thing. Like I said, it's tedious. But that's the long story. It's the long game. For the moment, I would appreciate having serious discussions, maybe SOAS? Yes, maybe SOAS can initiate serious discussions with designers of business models. That is not patronage. That is not, I see you shaking your head. Business models that could try for terroir, in fact, but that's very hard to do. Geographic indicators, very hard to do unless you're testing soil and climate. I think what we could look into is the amount of imaginative capability in finance as much as we demand from artists. I know that sounds really abstract, but I think it's the only way. Thanks, I'm sorry to leave it there.
I think we have another question over here.
Thank you very much, Mary, for a very intriguing and broadly researched presentation. And I might just add maybe a contribution to the question that you just asked. I think, as Marian pointed out, like with her last case study, that we're looking at broad flows throughout Southeast Asia, but at the same time, regional specificity is the way to go. And it may be because I'm an anthropologist, and so it's a way which you're going to navigate between the specific and the general. Because again, as Marian pointed out, any answer is very complex. So if you look at a particular weaving community, you want to look at the social, the economic, the political context within which they're working, politics being really, I think, important, as Marian has mentioned. And then, from that you can compare those specific conditions vis-a-vis, weaving or textile production, how they've affected other areas. I think that, one of the important points that you brought out, which I don't know if anyone's documented because I haven't looked at it, is that when you look at what society was like after the Second World War and into the 1960s, the whole economy opened up. And during that time, there was a lot of travel that there wasn't before, particularly Southeast Asia. And I guess I'm reflecting on personal experience because I'm part of that generation.
Yes.
So there was also a distinction between high and low art, which I've published on, and it's very problematic. So during the 1960s, people were traveling, roads were being built, and people who have always traded textiles for sugar or wax or honey were very gradually introduced to a cash economy. At the same time, there was a lot of violence and upheaval. So what I found, because I had to teach art history, was that was the time that this art craft background got really broken up. Ethnographic art across media opened up. So the complexity of the system, people were traveling, they were open to different things because it was the 60s. More cash economy was coming in. Violence was upsetting traditional so-called traditional practices, so that people needed cash. They sold their heirlooms, whether they were textiles. And at the same time, the whole art community was open to ethnographic arts in the 60s and 70s that they weren't before. So when you look at the scholarship, all of a sudden the writing on Southeast Asian textiles particularly was in the 60s and 70s and 80s, whereas everybody else had ignored ethnographic arts to a larger degree, except sort of colonial collections. So all those complexities put Southeast Asian textiles in a new light. And so people were avidly collecting them. People who had suffered climate crisis or violence had to sell something. And so the textiles all of a sudden were marketable because of these changes. So if you have a specific community that you can look at the history of, as Marian has done, in her case study, then you can look at that different historical complexity of all of these different actions falling in on one another, and then trace what has that meant for the particular practice. Before you made your textiles for your own rich ritual calendar, does it mean that you then immediately stop producing things carefully if you're not going to use them? Like my argument is, no. You keep producing textiles, hopefully in the best way you can for your own practice, but then you may have a production run. And this, is very much what the contemporary artists do. They'll have a production line, they're going to sell because all of a sudden their textiles are marketable, but they might take a little bit more care with the ones they're doing at home as long as they can. So I think my point is the specificity of looking at one community within that broader complexity of economic, political, and social circumstances can help you then understand in another Southeast Asian context, how individual communities have reacted to that. And I think violence is something that scholars don't look at, which I think is really important as a force to consider. So.
Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Leah. I'll respond with a story. It's very recent. A friend of mine is a Tiboli weaver. Her name's Yabman, and she was nominated to be a living national treasure. She didn't make it this time, but I was speaking to her a few months ago, and she was telling me a story that I found quite profound. She said that these major designers came to her house and asked if they could do what used to be warp ikat abaka in cotton. And I think she was appalled because there's the spirit of abaka. It's still there. I mean, no matter what you think that it's all gone, the secret knowledges are quite active, even if not articulated. So she was appalled, but it would have been income. It would have been a steady income. Just to shift from abaka, same thing, same. Now, she has a daughter-in-law, and her daughter-in-law has young children. And the young children need to be fed, and they need to go to school. So a decision was made in her family for the daughter-in-law to do the cotton ikat, while Yabman, the old woman, continues to refuse to change from abaka. Now, this is how there's agency in how you deal with change. They know how to deal with change if given a sort of empowering environment. They're not passive agents. of change. As you can see, it was the women who changed into the cash economy in the 1970s. They did it, for better or for worse. Some of them are quite jaded and cynical, but each one of us makes decisions. I rather marvel at this, the young woman with children can do the change. So that's my answer to your question. It's quite specific.
Oh, here? Okay.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. It's amazing. I just want to know this history about, you mentioned Ikat song time.
Well, it was all about ICAT.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
And I just want to know where is the Ikat coming from, original?
Oh.
If you see this from India, China, Japan, Malaysia, Philippines, go to Indonesia, and then Nusa Tenggara, Timor, stop there. Why? I never
It doesn't stop there.
I never know Papua have a
None.
yeah. Why?
I have no idea. I don't think there's anybody who knows. Would you venture an answer?
Well, were you here yesterday when I showed you, I didn't actually show, I should have showed you the image of the bronze weaver.
Yes, that one.
I mean, the bronze weaver image, which is about this size of a small woman sitting in a body-strap loom, suckling her child at the breast, and that represents what Ikat, on a very small loom like this, foot
that
tension loom, from Flores, found in Flores.
No, I mean
You're talking about where did it come from?
beyond Florida.
Beyond that. Really, it's Ruth Barnes and Matchball Gittinger and the Robin Maxwell and the greats of textiles have never actually come up with an answer. Where did it originate? We don't know.
We don't know.
We also have images from Dian drums in southwest China, big bronze drums with images on the top, houses and people, and weavers. And these are older than the 6th century weaver. So I think the knowledge is from China personally, not from India, from my point of view. Because the bronze drums are the earliest, probably before, and I don't have a date with me, but somebody can probably look it up. So Dian culture in southwest China, just on the border with the Thai area. Okay, see them there too.
Sorry, there's no answer.
Well, should we identify just one origin? I mean, there could be multiple origins.
Sure. Sure. Please. Which one?
Did someone here have the? Yes, go ahead.
Fantastic. I wish there were more people at SOAS here or in England who'd speak like you and be honest about textiles and not be full of the baggage of colonialism, etc. So I congratulate you on your presentation, which was excellent. But as an Indonesianist, can I correct maybe
Sure.
or put my
Sure.
input onto it? The warpy cat in Indonesia in the 50s, 60s and 70s was very poor. It had deteriorated. It was all commercial thread and chemical colors, and really had gone down. And the Indonesian government really worked on trying to bring this up again because ikat, along with batik, is part of the national heritage of Indonesian people. And so by the 80s and 90s, things start to revive. And so along with Threads of Life, who I'm sure some of you have heard of, and other organizations too, the warpy cat quality now, to some textile dealers, they say it has lost the soul. It is now so perfect and so good that it's better than the old ones before the deterioration. So we have a problem is it's so perfect, it's maybe lost its soul and the pure aesthetic that used to be there. So you have a balance from what you're discussing in the Philippines that's become something so refined. There's no flaws, there's no imperfections.
It's like CDs.
Yes. I have a Balinese wet ikat that has, the weaver obviously changed her mind, or someone else came in and suddenly the textile changes direction. I love it because it shows
Yeah.
there was a human, but now we've become perfect.
Chat GPT.
Yes. So that's what's happened in Indonesia, not in wrong with perfection, but perfection has become maybe too perfect.
Thank you so much. I needed that, really.
Just an input, really.
That's right. Thank you. Yes.
Just to continue on the conversation of the extent of ECOT, as we were talking, I remembered I came across like a Mexican ECOT technique before, and I just quickly Googled, but there is a technique called haspe in Latin American textile tradition, and it's also an ECOT tradition. So I'm just thinking, like, I guess there's no pat answer for origin or I don't know, travel mapping, but the map extends beyond Southeast Asia as well.
I was hoping to get there, but I hesitated because it's speculative at this point. It's completely hypothetical. We know, of course, yesterday. Thank you. You gave a map of Austronesia from Madagascar to Easter Island. So that's the set of languages that we all speak in that part of the world. Now, as you know, Easter Island is the outer extremity of the Austronesian world, and New Zealand, where the Maori are, well, Austronesians. So if you're talking about Rapa Nui, which is very close to Chile, in fact, it belongs to Chile. There are anthropologists and some archaeologists, one of whom I'm in touch with, who is really working on the hypothesis, underline the word hypothesis, that ECOT in South America came from the Austronesians. Because if the Austronesians were able to get themselves to Rapa Nui, they can very well get themselves to Chile 3,000 years ago. Highly speculative, but some scientists are actually working on it. Yes, Paul.
Yeah, I was intrigued about the comment you made about the need for sort of economic experimentation, similar to the kind of experimentation or innovation associated with artists.
Not associated. I'm sorry. I'm glad that you
demanded of artists.
Demanded of artists, because all fields. It doesn't matter whether it's mineralogy or textile studies or contemporary art or high finance. There's a sense that the demand for imagination is limited to certain fields. But I think at this point in the history of Homo sapiens, there is need to demand imagination from financial actors, whether institutional actors or individual actors. I'm sure we haven't begun to think about it. What are the financial instrumentalities that does not degenerate into patronage? That's one question. What kinds of financial instruments do not end up as long-term giving of money until there's the end of that window? What kinds of instrumentalities may be possible or designed that do not support dependencies, codependencies, et cetera, et cetera? Surely. I'm going to give an example which might bring home my point, and some people might contest me on this, but you're not in the room. So I'll go ahead. But perhaps Pio's father might support me, not contest me. The civil society organizations of the Philippines, which are incredibly vibrant and have been since martial law, because these were the only organizations that were delivering needed services to the poor of the Philippines throughout the martial law period and beyond, because the government certainly wasn't. I mean, the Philippines would have been in civil war without civil society. Now, at a certain point, all the robust civil society organizations of the Philippines, they had begun to coalesce. The major coalitions around 86 and beyond 86. That was people power. And of course, they're all bright and sophisticated. They got more and more sophisticated. And at a certain point, they knew that all of the fund sources for civil society work is going to stop. I mean, it cannot go on forever. So with that understanding, there was a major coalition of civil society organizations. They were called Code NGO. They went to a financial genius to ask what is the way out if funding is going to stop already from Holland, from the usual givers of civil society funding. What is there to do next? How do you keep it going? Because the government still wasn't giving the delivery of services. And how does it stand on its own without forever begging and writing up grant proposals? So this person, I'm not sure I get this person devised this plan of floating a bond. This is the zero coupon bonds, if you recall. The zero coupon bonds were floated against the ability of civil society to deliver. So it's an abstract concept of civil society delivering that was given a financial value of a few billion pesos. The bonds were floated. Central bank approved it. There was some controversy, but it got through. It's a one-shot genius stroke. It cannot be repeated. So the bond that was floated was immediately bought. Well, it was given to banks to buy. You're actually buying the ability of civil society to deliver. It's complete conceptual art. It's there's nothing there except that notion. All right, so what happened? One bank bought the bond, all of it, RCBC, and immediately turned around and sold it, making a profit of a few billions. The profit was shared with the civil society organization, the coalition. So right now, Code NGO is sitting on billions of pesos from that sale by the bank, and it had put an end to constant asking for grant money from Europe. So that's what I mean by it's imagination, it's legal, it can't be done again. But I don't think we've exhausted exploring for possibilities. But I think the key is scale. If we have an understanding of the exquisite nature of what we're dealing with, what was lost, what can be recuperated, but I don't like the word recuperated because you really cannot recuperate the entire complex of society. But if we are fair, if we are just, part of justice is economic systems, economic designs that are as sophisticated as the textiles. And we can only get there if we understand how sophisticated the textiles are or were. I'm sorry, that's the only way I can put it. Cherry.
Marian, thank you so much for, you've always had this vision and grasp of the textile landscape, and it's your life's work. It's just wonderful, your thought. Thank you so much. So I guess on one hand, I'm more optimistic, so I'm happy to hear what you said about Indonesia, about degradation and all that. That's just, I guess, a position I just have to take. Otherwise, but generally, I feel like that because of the importance of textiles in such a deep way in all of these societies, that there is going to be some kind of living, systems that will resurge, reemerge, and innovate. Right? It's not going to be the way it was in the past. The other things I wanted to thank you also for making the point about it's the importance of site-specific stories. So yes, the Tiboli story, thank you for bringing out the stories of Father Mansman and, right? And
Yes.
right? These are really kind of important stories too for the Tiboli. I guess, and I urge, I guess there are people here hopefully who will do other research in the future, right? The Mandaya story is different, right? How their road to the market Blaan story, right? I'm kind of trying to tell the Pagogo story. But my question for you is, I guess it's a tricky one. When I was thinking about the Tiboli and, you know, their quote-unquote success, because it is a success, right? In compromised ways based on what you produce. Do you not think that somehow also the early quote-unquote entry of Santa Cruz Mission, right, in that exchange that they made, right, where the Datu said, have the landing come here and make sure we have health care and schools, despite its compromise and, you know, outcomes, also kind of, I don't know if you would say it hastened or it created structures for the access to the cash economy, right? Right. So like, apart from the women in Maituan and all that, right, that it's also the mission. I believe the mission had a store in Manila.
Yes.
Right? So
That's how I found Tinala.
right, yes. So it's got that early pathway into to the market. Right? So I guess that's my question. And second, it's the observation I saw about loom length cloth. That's for sale, which is a marker of Mandaya and Tiboli.
Correct.
Which is something that, you know, I kind of noted many years ago, right? Which is not the case for Blaan, right, and Pagogo. And there are all these interesting failures that are happening with the Blaan and the Pagogo, right, trying to enter the loom length marketing, right? So I guess my question for you would be like, you know, the Santa Cruz mission story, part of the mission story in there, complex as it is, right? Could you say a little bit more about that, you know, in terms of the pathway to the market for the women, you know, apart from the direct exchange that, you know, that.
I suppose very quickly said. It was simply a case of, it's something that's still a little bit vague in my head, and part of my mission here in London is to interview Billie Riley, actually, which I'm going to do, because she was there in the 1970s. Let's go back to the discursive competition between Manda Elizalde and Rex Mansman, because Rex Mansman didn't like the Manda Elizalde formulation of Panamin, the presidential assistant for national minorities, and here was an alternative. But the alternative meant some degree already in the 1970s of revival. Because there was one woman, Yetlo, who was actually, in a sense, the big weaving woman in the 1970s. So there was a, I'm still trying to reconstruct this, but there was a possibility that there were very few ikat dyers in that general area among the Tiboli at that point. And because there was this one woman who actually was the kind of at the middle of it all. But the fact that it could supply the shop in Malate, which is in Manila, and I was in the shop in the 1970s, it was a lot of tinalak at the time. So there was immediately a kind of production. But if you ask Benji, who's over there, that the textile supported the mission itself, the operations of the school. Am I correct, Benji? It supported the school. Right. That is all. I'll leave it there for the moment because there are a few things that I do not understand very well. Number one, aside from Yetlo, were there other women? Because Yetlo's name is very striking. Everyone remembers her because she was the first wife of the man, name escapes me right now, who gave the land to Santa Cruz Mission. All right, so number one is, I'm trying to get the names of the others, if there were others, in the 1970s. And Benji saying there were others. Okay, including his own grandparents. Okay, so this, Benji? Yeah, Boy Diwafu was one of them. That's right, during that period. Whether they directly supplied the mission shop in Santa Mesa, in Malate, I don't know which, if there was a correspondence. All I know is that I did personally see that there was a lot. The shop was not a small shop. It was probably about 20 square meters, and it was full of tinalak at that time. That's all I can say for the moment. Thank you. Yes,
One straightforward question. You kept talking about there is no more silk.
there's no silk, yes.
Is that because of money or because nobody's importing it? Why is there no more silk?
Mostly war.
It's war. But nobody wants to bring it in? Just they can't? There's just...
That's really...
Sorry.
No. It's really an important question, but for some reason I never thought...
Indonesian groups are importing silk from
Yes.
constant bales and bales of it and making.
Well, the people in
I was
Southern...
wondering why it wasn't importable into Mindanao when it's importable into.
It's importable to Mindanao. It was imported. There was no silk in the Philippines at all. So prior to this contemporary period, there was silk. All of the textiles of Muslim Filipinos were in silk. Very few were in cotton. Now, when the war started in 1969, the Moro secessionist movement, Mindanao was at war. And so aside from people who were evacuated constantly because of fires, entire villages being razed to the ground, the battles were intense. There was simply, it was a state of war. There was simply no trading. In fact, many of the weavers were running. So those were the circumstances that's only beginning to come to an end now. I'm not sure it's come to an end, as a matter of fact. But there are human beings, there are groups that are trying to bring in the silk, of course. And I'm watching if that will succeed. We have a little bit of a window now. It's almost like a post-war.
Maybe just one more question before we end. Yeah.
I'm trying to formulate this in my head, but speaking about two things. And I think we've been having this conversation for the last
Yes, we are.
years. So,
Yeah.
so one is political imagination, and the other is social justice. And the history of the Philippines, at least recently, seems to be that these two things are at odds with each other. Like, the people that try to imagine alternative political methods seem to be penalized because they fail to capture the imagination of the populace. Does that make sense? I'm trying not to generalize, but this is something that I've been grappling with. But I also want to end on a glimmer of hope. So I was wondering, during your time being embedded in these communities, whether you found instances where these flights of imagination are actually.
The flight of imagination is actually here, and that's in the person of Benji over there. He is an incredible moment of hope. And you've seen the movie, you've seen the film, the instance of repatriation, which immediately became rematriation. That is a source of incredible joy for all of us who have been working in Mindanao. I'm going to try to say something, but not directly to answer your question, because I'm not sure I grasp entirely.
I'm trying to think through it.
But let's do it within the realm of textiles, so that it's graspable. As you can see, firstly, I'd like to point out why there's such difficulty trying to reference old Philippine textiles, and it's because most of it is not in the Philippines. The fact that the Second World War destroyed Manila, nearly 90% of Manila, meant that the National Museum of the Philippines was destroyed in the Second World War, and that the reference collections of any of the material culture of the Philippines went up in smoke in 1945. So we have been groping in the dark until we found the material culture that's scattered all over the world and thankfully have survived. So how do you, in fact, formulate a national imagination with a lobotomy in place? It's like part of your brain is not there. You can't imagine any of the things that you never saw. I'd say that some of the textiles that I showed you today, the weft ikat silk, very few people have seen those. Even the bishabit, very few. The tapestries are really few and far between. So we begin with how you even begin to have a sufficient political imagination without recollection, without references. And so we're hobbling around. Indonesia, on the other hand, has spectacular samples, not only in the Tropen Museum, everywhere, Leiden, but in Jakarta and in the islands. There are museums all over the islands in Indonesia. So the references are very close. So much as war happened and political turmoil happened in Indonesia, you can say that in bigger ways, because it's like a bigger set of people. But as far as imagining yourself out of some recollection of what your grandparents were able to do, Indonesia has stronger possibilities. Unless we manage, and that's why I do commend the thing that brought me here. The thing is actually the SOAS mapping project, because I think this is vital to the question that you're asking. Thanks. Thank you, Tina. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry we couldn't get around to everyone's questions, but I would like to invite you all to a lunch break.